In his character and personality, in the words he speaks, in his actions, he is the acme of the human being, the role model of what a human being should be.
He is a remarkable man from the point of view of his ability to relate to people. And I don't know anybody else at all who can match him.
I think he's so much down to earth. You know, his power and world acknowledgement has not gone to his head at all. He remains humble. He doesn't talk down to people.
Mandela, humane. I think his humanity is everything, you know, yeah. What more could you say about a person?
Johannesburg, the city of gold. For white, it was a city of opportunity. For migrant workers who labored in the mines, it was a city of false hope, where the lines of segregation were clearly drawn. Nelson Mandela, a young man of noble blood, arrived here from the Transkei. He met Walter Sisulu, a businessman who recommended that he seek articles with a prominent lawyer, Laser Sadelsky.
Now, the first time I met Jewish people was when I came to Johannesburg in 1941. And I met Mr. Sadelsky, and he took me over. It was a very brave thing for Laser Sadelsky to article me those days, because for quite a long time, no South African firm, white firm, had ever done that.
When I knew him then in the office, you know, he had one suit, and he dressed very well in that one suit. We had quite a bit of fun, because in those days you had lifts in mutual buildings where we were for whites, and you had the goods lift were for blacks. And Nelson and I used to enjoy walking together into the white lift, you know, much to the consternation of the other passengers in the lift and the guy who operated the lift. A very studious chap. He was determined to get through his exams. And the difference, of course, being that I was doing my exams with electricity in my home where I was staying, and he was doing it by candlelight. And when Sadelsky gave him a rise, and he said to him, "Nelson, what are you going to do with the rise?" He said, "I'm going to buy more candles so I can study later in the night."
Nelson Mandela joined the African National Congress and met white South Africans who had joined the liberation struggle to protest against social injustice. During the 1952 Defiance campaign, Mandela emerged as a charismatic leader. He joined forces with Oliver Tambo, and they opened the first black law firm in downtown Johannesburg.
Whenever I went to Johannesburg, I would go to the office of Tambo and Mandela just to pay my respects. The office would be jam-packed with the people coming with all their woes and problems from the townships, from the rural areas, to two attorneys whom they could trust. And they would say, you would see, Comrade Albie, that we're very, very crowded. I wish we could have some more time, but I've asked Comrade Ruth to give you a cup of tea. Thank you very much for coming. They'd always ask, how is the struggle going in Cape Town? And I'd have about 35 seconds to tell them how the struggle was going in Cape Town.
In 1955, 3,000 delegates braved police intimidation to attend the Congress of the People at Kliptown, a small village near Johannesburg. The Freedom Charter, the vision for a non-racial and democratic South Africa, was adopted there.
In December 1956, in a nationwide roundup, the South African government arrested 156 persons of all races on charges of treason. The accused had called for equal rights for all citizens, black and white.
I mean, it was frightening. There were these 156 people taken from all around the country, and my husband included, you know. So now I was asked to become the fundraiser for the Treason Trial Fund. And I must say, despite everything in South Africa, we raised a hell of a lot of money there.
The Jewish community has been particularly striking on their commitment to the enjoyment of democratic values by all people in a country. They have come out, for example, in the numerous political cases that we had, to offer their services. Top Jewish lawyers regarded it as their duty to defend us, where many lawyers were not prepared.
The treason trial lasted 4 years. Amongst the defendants were Chief Albert Luthuli, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and Jack Hodgson. 15 were Jewish. They included Joe Slovo, Ruth First, and Rusty Bernstein. 2 Jewish lawyers, Sidney Kentridge and Izzy Maisels, defended them.
Izzy Maisels was a very outstanding lawyer. And in the course of the treason trial, he then developed and became aware of what was happening in the country. But he quickly got into stride and became not only the best lawyer, but one of the best politicians from the point of view of the atmosphere in court. And he was able to put our views as we ourselves would put them.
And the day of the trial coming to an end, we saw what I cannot explain to you with words. It's very difficult indeed. The excitement, the carrying of our lawyers, you see, up the air.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. Accepting that there are differences between people. But while these differences exist, and you have to acknowledge them, at the same time, you can live together, aid one another, but that it can best be done when you act as good neighbors always do.
After the treason trial ended, Mandela went underground and was dubbed the Black Pimpernel. State repression against protesters increased, and in 1960, 69 people were killed at Sharpeville. Forced removals from white areas meant that black workers had to live in hostels or matchbox houses, in townships, far from the cities.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
I was the liaison between those in hiding and those who hadn't been picked up, so that we kept the movement going for that length of time.
Ronnie Casrells and all sorts of people would come and be busy churning out the stuff, and then they would go off to experiment, and you would read that night that a bomb had gone off, and it was Jack, you know, doing it. And Nelson, I think the first bomb they ever put with Jack and Nelson and Wolfie Kodish, I think, were together. I don't know if anyone else was.
Because lawful protest seemed closed to them, young English and Jewish South Africans committed a number of acts of sabotage which were used by the government to further justify suppression of dissent.
So then he started running on the spot, you know, that sort of running. And there he was, puffing away and running, you know, and his arms flailing and you know, sort of moving. And he said, from tomorrow, you'll be starting with me. So I started when I first go off, I was quite fit, I was younger, you know. I think I did a quarter of an hour and I flaked out, you know. But by the time he left, I was doing about an hour, you know, a good hour.
In 1961, the ANC bought a farm in Rivonia as a safe house. Mandela posed as the gardener, and it was here Winnie and the children were able to visit him. Mandela had spoken at clandestine meetings in Natal and was arrested on his way back to Johannesburg. He was tried for resisting arrest and leaving the country illegally. In 1964, the police raided the farm and arrested most of the ANC leadership. Amongst the Rivonia trialists were Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, and Dennis Goldberg.
The accused hoped that the Republic of South Africa would find itself in a chaotic condition with widespread disorder and turmoil, and as a result of which the accused further hoped thereby to bring the present government to its knees and thus violently overthrow it.
The verdict of guilty on 8 of the 9 accused was not altogether surprising because Nelson Mandela himself and others had admitted guilt on certain charges. Mandela had declared in court, "I planned sabotage because all lawful methods of opposition were closed. I have cherished the ideal of democratic society with equal opportunity for all. That is an ideal," he said, "for which I am prepared to die."
Doctor, how are you?
Very pleased.
Well, you still look young and fresh.
Very kind of you to say that.
Dr. Percy Yuta became known as the man who sent Nelson Mandela to jail for 27 years.
I can assure you that I never had any hostile feeling. Because the man was doing his duty. We had our own duty to do.
These were the darkest days of apartheid. The leaders of the banned liberation movements were either in prison or in exile.
Helen Suzman, as you know, I think for 13 years, remained the only voice of enlightenment in a parliament which was dominated by very conservative and reactionary elements.
Helen, your realistic solution. What is your realistic solution? Realistic solution is that you put the black man in charge of South Africa.
No,
there's no slightest doubt.
But you're sure there's no reason why you should supersede white supremacy by black supremacy. You can have a multiracial parliament in South Africa, surely.
Good. How are you going to do it? How are you going to do it with 16 million blacks?
But you know,
and 4 million whites?
But I think there's a great deal of goodwill still remaining among black people if whites would only make the necessary concessions from a position of power and before it's too late.
I had heard terrible stories about the treatment of political prisoners, and I knew they were very likely true. So I badgered old Pete Peltzer, who was then the Minister of Justice, into letting me go and visit them, which I did. And as I walked into the door, there was one prisoner I knew, Daniels, Eddie Daniels, and he said, "Don't waste time with us. Go and talk to our leader. He's up at the top." And I walked to the top, and there, standing inside the cell, was this very tall, imposing-looking man, wonderful posture, very good-looking man, who put his hand through the bars and shook my hand and said, "I'm very glad you've come." And I said, "I'm very glad to meet you, Mr. Mandela." I came out of Robben Island and I said to the press, "That man's our last hope of a peaceful solution to our problems." And indeed, it proved to be so, but many years later. And that started what has really been a long, enduring friendship. We don't always agree. He says I quarrel with him, and I do sometimes.
So we have a lot of respect for Helen Suzman. He is my friend.
The Soweto uprising began on the 16th of June, 1976. From 1984, the popular protest gathered momentum. The National Party government was now faced with an ungovernable black population and condemnation from the outside world. On the 11th of February 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. He was 71 years old. What followed was a negotiated political settlement, which led to the first democratic election in 1994.
The main religions of the country have to participate in all state events, which is why I had the honor of taking part in Madiba's inauguration and Thabo Mbeki's inauguration.
Violence shall no more be heard in the land, nor ruin and devastation within thy borders, but thou shalt call thy ramparts salvation, and thy gates glory. Justice shall make its home even in the wilderness, and righteousness dwell in the grassland. And the work of righteousness shall be peace, and the fruit thereof quietness and confidence forever.
It is due to the oppression of the Jewish people down throughout history that we have a feeling for the underdog, that we can always sense the desperation of those who are being maltreated.
The Jews have been persecuted right around the world, and they are therefore very sensitive to the denial of opportunities to other communities.
In Robben Island, compulsory reading was the diary of Anne Frank.
Because in one sense, Anne Frank lived in prison for all the period she remained in that room. We were in prison, and we could therefore take heart from the fact that there were people who lived like us.
And that's really the answer to the question that so many people have asked. You know, what's a white like you doing in a black movement like this, fighting for the freedom of others? I wasn't fighting for the freedom of others. I was fighting for my freedom, for my right to be a free person in a free country. And the only way I could do that was by joining the movement of the oppressed people who were fighting for the freedom of everybody.
Nelson Mandela opened the South African Jewish Museum on the 13th of December 2000.
Their first minyan, their first congregational meeting, 1841. We ask you to grace our platform by opening our museum. Thank you very much.
A museum is there to remind us of the important chapters in the history of a country. It is absolutely necessary for us to know
the landmarks of the history of each community in this country. We can't talk about building a rainbow nation if we do not know the history of each community. I want you to know that whatever differences we have, whatever quarrels, there is one thing we appreciate: the role that has been played by the Jewish community in this country. There was a time when no lawyer in this country was prepared to take our cases, when only Jewish lawyers could defend us. They also have played a very important role from the point of view of the economy of the country. And it's a community which we respect, which we admire.
Why did the Jews play such a role in South Africa, in other countries, not only in developing the country, but in fighting all forms of discrimination? It goes back 2,700 years, when a man called Jeremiah was taken into exile in Egypt, and he said to those who were leaving Israel at the time and going to strange countries, to diasporas, he said, "What are you going to do when you leave your country and you go to other countries?" He said, "I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to seek the welfare of the country in which you dwell, and you will pray to the Lord for its welfare, because in its welfare will be your peace." And the only thing that we did in this diaspora and elsewhere was seek the welfare of the people of the country in which we dwell.